As you've brought us here today, Lord, we'd like to thank you for life. Thank you for safety throughout the day. And as we are about to start this session, we're asking you please to remove self from all of us. Please to remove whatever barriers may be blocking our minds. Please to remove whatever errors that may even be taught from now. Let your Holy Spirit enlighten us and open up that true wisdom to us as we dig into your word, dig into history, and to see the end from the beginning. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Please, one thing that I will be requesting is feedback. I like to talk. More of a teacher than a preacher. So, let's turn to Daniel 11 and let's read verse 40. We'll read it together. When you find it, just say amen. Daniel 11:40. We all there? Amen. All right. And it says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, and with horses, and with many ships. And he shall enter into countries, and shall overflow and pass over." So my question here is, who is the king of the south in this verse? Who is king of the south in Daniel 11 verse 40?
Atheistic France.
Atheistic France in the first part. So in Daniel 11:40a is atheistic France, right? And what's the proof we have of this? Revelation 11 verse what? It starts at verse 8, yes. It is verse 8 actually. So the proof of this is Revelation 11:8. So we know there's a part B to it. So who's the king of the south in part B? Atheistic USSR. But you said Russia. So I'm going to put Russia right here. Why is it important that we differentiate Russia from the USSR?
Because USSR is it's like a leader of nation.
Exactly. It's a conglomerate of different states, with Russia being the head.
Yes.
Right? And we have realized in our studies, and we'll go over some of it tomorrow, well, today and tomorrow, that when we get to Daniel 11:10, we recognize that USSR was conquered all the way up but to the head. So there is still Russia. And throughout our present history, we realize that Russia is now rising and they are now becoming a dominant world power. We're now getting back to the time where we have two world powers. So in realizing this, and we know we have Russian Premier Vladimir. Does anybody remember what the name Vladimir means? World ruler, world conqueror, right? Wouldn't it do us as President Truthers good to actually understand the root of Russia? So this is what this presentation is all about. This is basically the seven thunders of Russia. All right. This is my interpretation of it. I did the history of it, read it, studied it many hours, and this is what I came up with. And there are also variables to it if we're going to really break it down. And I'm open to correction, so at any time. So the first thing that interested me was the first major leader name in Russia, guess what his name was? Vladimir the Great. Now, who are the Russians? Now, I'm going to do an abstract art, because let's say this is Russia, right? This is my version of Russia, right? This is Russia. My version of Russia. You have some people down here. This area is usually called the steppes. And throughout history, we know that this is where you get like Attila the Hun and all these other people. Well, from this, the Russia started with Kiev. There was a Prince Runikid, who was a Viking actually, and he would sail down the river from Europe and conquer. So the Kiev people, they kind of liked him because they've been beaten by him a few times before. They asked him, you know, let's gather up these states, gather up these tribes, I should say, and he became the first leader. However, what made him different, he was just a leader of tribes. Vladimir the Great turned Russia itself into, I would say, a country. It hadn't fully established itself, but it was on its way. And what he did that made it so significant, in 988, remember, if we remember our history of Rome, Rome was split into how many parts? Two parts. We had the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. What was the name of the Eastern Empire? Start with a B. The Byzantine Empire. He got Christianity from the Byzantine Empire. He had a choice. He had a choice between Islam and, he had a choice between Western and Eastern Catholicism, or Western Empire and the Byzantine Empire. And because of the inconsistencies with the Western Empire, he decided to go with the Eastern Empire. And from him, you have the beginning of the Russian Orthodox Church. He was not the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, but because he introduced Christianity to Russia, that led to the growth of the Russian Orthodox Church. It even led to the use of the alphabet that Russia now uses, because Western Empire, they would use more of our alphabet with more Latin letters and stuff. So first person we have here is Vladimir the Great. Now, the name of, this is called the Runikid Empire. Prince Runikid was the one that came down the river and established. So we have the Runikid Empire now getting set up, and it's growing. And the Runikid Empire ruled for 700 plus years, all right? We're gonna jump a couple centuries and to Ivan the Terrible. Why? Even though he introduced Christianity, Russia never really changed. There were still nomadic people. I mean, it's a very big country. With a country with 20 million people, for its size, is really not a lot of people in comparison. But not until we got to 1533, where we had Ivan the Terrible, where we saw Russia growing. Russia started to expand. It is said that Ivan probably added 1 million acres to Russia alone, all right? So that's why we have an increase of knowledge, because not only did they expand, but he also started to do modern reformation to the people, to the armies, to everything. Russia started to grow. They started to come out of an isolation type of environment. Also, what Ivan did, he was one of the first to fight against Islam, one of the first. Now, there's some interesting little historical facts I'd like to plug in here. Moscow was, or is, the capital of Russia at this time, right? Does anybody know what Moscow was called back then also? The Third Rome. Why do you think that is? All right, let's think back. The first Rome was abandoned by who?
Constantine.
Constantine. The second Rome was destroyed when?
Which aspect?
The second Rome was destroyed in 1453. That was Constantinople.
Eastern Empire.
Exactly. So, because now we have the growth of the Russian Orthodox Church, who, if you study their history, they will tell you that they are Catholic. They're not afraid to tell you they're Catholic. You have in 1453 the destruction of Constantinople. So Moscow considered themselves the third Rome because they had all the ensembles of Catholicism, of Eastern Catholicism. And without the influence of Western Catholicism anymore, they consider themselves the third Rome. All right? So that happened within this time period. The church was still growing. Does anybody know the difference between, the major difference, I should say, between Orthodox Catholics and the Western Catholics? The Pope. They have no Pope. They don't believe in this one man central figure as the Pope. They have bishops, and they come together and they make decisions. They may have one older or wiser person above them, but it's still a group decision. There's 5 major differences, but this is the one that we're interested in. They don't believe in the Pope as far as to rule, one man having a God-like rule over anybody. And this is going to play a part in Daniel 11. All right? So we have all of this happening in here. Now, 9/11, I have Mikhail Romanov. One of the biggest reasons why is the Runikid family, they lost control of Russia. And a 16-year-old noble was elected to rule, and his name was Mikhail Romanov. And he started to do a lot of reforms. And one of the major reforms that he did was within the church. He instituted a new legal code was instituted underneath him, and greater light from the church, greater reforms was brought in. And that's one of the reasons why I have it at 9/11, whereas if we think about 9/11 in our times, we had an opening up of light. Granted, we have to look at this, however, as a chiastic flip also, that while we had great light, their great light was more of civil, and some of their changes led to destruction. I think he was the one that introduced serfdom. If we remember what serfdom is, like modern slavery, or not modern, but it's slaves who didn't even know they were slaves. Okay, when you're a serf, you were born a serf. You die a serf, you have no control over anything, you just don't realize that you're a slave. It's just a nice way to say you're a slave. So he was one of those that introduced serfdom. But Russia really didn't grow and expand, and the foundations for Russia was laid under these two rulers, Peter and Catherine. Now, they did not rule at the same time. Peter the Great started in 1689, Catherine the Great some 40, 50 years later, because she was actually the wife of his grandson. All right? So with Peter the Great, what we see happening, he was the first to tour Russia. He was the first, not Russia, I'm sorry. He was the first to tour Europe. And when he went to Europe and he recognized these great armies, they have guns, they have all these modern technology, the nobles shaved, they had all these things. He came back to Russia and he's like, I cannot have my people looking like this. He built cities. He got Russia's economy going. It was a real golden time in Russia, and he expanded. He continued to expand Russia. And he also went out and he sought allies to fight against a common enemy that we always see at 9/11, which is Islam. He started a big war with Islam. Now, throughout Russian history, we realize that Islam has a very, very big effect on them. There was a time period right after Vladimir the Great where they were conquered by Genghis Khan and his son. And that's the time period of the Golden Horde. They were conquered all the way up to their major European cities for a very long time, and a lot of people converted to Islam in the end because of that. So Islam has always had a great effect upon Russian history, but under these rulers, especially Peter and Catherine, but they started to really fight back. They always fought back, but here we see a major stamp. And Peter was the first to start using more Western philosophies, Western warfare techniques, and on to push. And the major enemy for them at this time was the Ottoman Empire, Turkey. So they started to really push back underneath Peter. And they said the war with Peter, it concluded in the 1700s. It's called the Treaty of Constantine. So what happened to Russia here, they joined a league, I think it's called the Holy League, to push against the Ottoman Empire. So that's with the foundation. With Catherine, we find the same thing. Now, what made Catherine so wonderful, in a sense, there were 4 female empresses of Russia, and she was the 4th. All right? She was the wife of Peter, not this Peter, but Peter the Great's grandson, and she murdered him. It is said that she murdered him and took control of the throne. She was not Russian. She was actually German. Russians have this thing about marrying Germans, I presume. So, but she was a friend of Voltaire. Now, do we remember who Voltaire was? Under the French Revolution, he was one of those. No, he wasn't a general. No. He was one of the philosophers that pushed for reason over Christ. So she was a friend of this Renaissance movement, a friend of this age. She really, really liked it. She enjoyed what she saw because the Renaissance was a period of enlightenment. So she was really pushing, or she stood with what's called reason and progress. And underneath Catherine, even greater than Peter, Russia had the most growth, the most growth and the most influence over the world. At that time period, they grew a lot economically, and but there's always a huge difference. There's always the elites, and then you have the serfs. And of course, the elite is always the smaller percentage. And it's important to understand that, because it's going to continue and grow and play out a big part by the time we come up to the midnight. So that's on these are the foundations of what makes Russia, or who makes Russia what it is. Now, some history of Catherine the Great. She also fought against the Ottoman Empire. So once again, we have Islam, as I said, under these two. They fought against the Ottoman Empire. And she won. She had a successful fight against them, and they were able to push back the Ottoman Empire. Now, we know Turkey did not fall until 1840. So underneath all of this time, Turkey or the Ottoman Empire was weakening. They would lose territory, they would fight and gain territory, and it was a back and forth struggle. But what was happening is that this state of Russia was just growing on all sides. It was growing deeper west into China, it was growing further south, it was going further north, and Catherine the Great was one of the antithesis of that. After she died, there were some successive kings between here and here. And it's important that we know some of these kings before we get up to midnight, because it's close to her death when she realized how bad the French Revolution had turned out, how many people were dying. She turned her back on these people. So in her youth, she was a big friend of Voltaire, and she loved the French, the Age of Reason, the Renaissance growth. But once she saw the fruits of the French Revolution, she did not want to have anything to do with it. She didn't want to be a part of it. She turned her back on it. And her son, Paul, he was not a very big friend of France, I should say. His mom turned her back on France, or on the revolution. So when he became king, and he didn't rule for very long, he only ruled for 5 years, he went to war with France, and they murdered him in his palace. So his reign was very short. Then you had Alexander, who was, I'm not sure if it was his brother, but he had a series of war called the Napoleonic Wars. Now what made it interesting was he and Napoleon actually signed a treaty. They fought a couple of wars, and they came to a few stalemates, and they formed a treaty. Now in 1812, Napoleon went back on that treaty and invaded Russia. In doing so, Moscow was defeated, and what the Russians did, they burnt the city and they burnt all the fields, because this was what Napoleon was dependent on to feed his army. So by the time the Russian winter set in, he had to withdraw. And while they were going out, the Russian army would attack, and this led to the downfall of Napoleon, this defeat. Now, did we see that repeat in history anywhere? What war was that repeated in? Same country, Russia, but who betrayed Russia and invaded and paid a heavy price in 1942 or 1943? Nazi Germany. In 1942, they signed a treaty with Russia, or USSR. They divided up Poland. They both invaded, conquered Poland, divided it up, and then Hitler decided, I'm going into Russia. In doing so, the same thing happened. Got stuck in winter, no food. The Russians came back and defeated them during the winter. All right? And these histories, they parallel each other, on top of each other, and they're all important, because all of this ties into Daniel 11. It all ties into Daniel 11. We just have to get through this little part of it before we could see it all. So through a series of wars, Alexander, he formed what's called a Holy Alliance with Russia, Prussia, and Austria. And with this Holy Alliance, he had a series of wars with the Ottoman Empire. He eventually died, not a glorious death, but he died. And then we had another Tsar in 1825, and this is an important Tsar. This is Tsar Nicholas I. Now, why he's listed at midnight? What are we expecting to see at midnight? Like, just give me a few things that we expect to see at midnight. Battle of Raphia. But we expect to see the first beginnings of the Sunday Law, right? So what he did, remember Sister White has a quote that, if I wrote it down properly, with national comes national. So what is national apostasy? What would you say is national apostasy? So basically church and state. Anywhere you see church and state, you have national apostasy. Now it's interesting that what Tsar Nicholas did, he had a rule. It's called the three doctrines, right? He says, and pardon my spelling, I can't spell, orthodoxy, Orthodoxy, this is a D, right? And that's a Y. Plus nationality. How you spell nationality? N-A-T? I-O-N-A-L-I-T-Y. Plus autocracy. A-U-T-O-C-R-A-C-Y. Okay, orthodoxy, nationality, autocracy. Church, people, king. So we have what are these? Church and state, right? He believed that if he sets his principles on these three doctrines, Russia cannot fail. That's why I have him at midnight. So he has these principles which he wants to rule from. And what do you think happened? Russia immediately began to crumble. This was the beginning of the end of the Romanov family. Okay? This was in 1825. How much time I got left? Oh boy. Okay, so now in doing so, we have thank you. In doing so, we have another series of czars that popped up in the middle here. And in 1894, from Midnight to Midnight Cry, we have Tsar Nicholas II. Now, why is that important to us? He was the last Tsar of Russia. Nicholas II was the last Tsar of Russia. He was the last of the Romanov family. And underneath his rule, or his father before him was assassinated, actually, but underneath his rule, we have the fall of the Romanov, but also the beginning of new forms of government in Russia. So we're seeing in this Midnight to Midnight Cry experience, we're seeing a changeover. We're literally seeing the deconstruction of Russia. All this autocracy started to fall. Now the Orthodox Church sits upon the autocracy. Whenever you have a powerful king, you have a powerful church. And there's one thing I forgot to mention, and it started over here. Ivan the Terrible was one of the first to go with the name Tsar. Do we know what Tsar means? No? Or C-S-A-R. There should be a clue. Caesar. So when they were going with the name Tsar, it's because they truly believed they were Rome. They have, in taking the name Tsar, the spirit of Rome. So here we have the last Caesar. We have inside the Midnight to Midnight Cry time period, we have the last Caesar. He led Russia to World War I. All right, and in the middle of World War I, right around 1917, which is a very important year, he was deposed. Actually, he was deposed a little bit before 1917, and he had to voluntarily abdicate his throne. He had to voluntarily abdicate his throne. Russia was going through various crises, and he voluntarily abdicated his throne. Now, in 1917, I'm going to erase my ugly Russia over here. In 1917, I think this is the beginning of the Midnight Cry experience. There's a reason I put 1922. The truth, in fact, it should say 1917 to 1922. Reason being, there were two revolutions in 1917. So here we have a doubling. We have what's called the February Revolution. In the February Revolution, in reading about it, I didn't study it, in reading about it, you realize it started similar to the French Revolution. It was a women's march upon the city, up to the royalty of the time, begging for bread. And if we remember anything about the French Revolution, we had a women's march asking for bread, and Marie Antoinette says if they have no bread, let them eat cake. We have pretty much the same thing happening here. Okay, so we have, during that revolution, it ended peacefully, no bloodshed. And we have the royal family at that time. They didn't abdicate the throne, but it was right around that time period they started to give up power. Now, as we went further on in the year, they had to give up their throne. Basically, they were living in exile. And Vladimir Lenin, right around, he was the leader of the Bolshevik Party, right around 1917 in October. You have what's called the October Revolution, and it led to the Russian Civil War, basically the Reds versus the White. Now, here's another thing. What calendar are we on? We're on the Gregorian calendar. So while we're talking about dates by saying the February Revolution and the October Revolution, if we put it on the Gregorian calendar, it would be the March Revolution and the November Revolution. Because during this time period, Russia was still on the Julian calendar. And if you don't know that, you're going to look and you're going to find a hard time. Well, it's not that hard now because we have the knowledge. But before, you would look for it, and you're seeing this revolution happen in March, but you're looking for the February Revolution, or you're looking for the October Revolution, and seeing it in November. All because of the Julian calendar. Russia was still on the Julian calendar while the rest of the world was still on the Gregorian calendar. So while all of this was happening in Russia, there was a vision happening in Portugal in 1917. Have we ever heard about the visions of Fatima? Now, what does the second? We're only interested in the second vision. There are three visions. Okay? What does the second vision of Fatima says? I'm sorry? That's the one about converting Russia. That's the one about converting Russia. It's, I'm trying to find it here. I had it saved. I'm going to read it to you. It's a real quick read. It says, you have seen, and this is from Sister Lucinda. This was her report, because she had this vision twice. She had this in 1917 as a child, and then after she went to the convent and became a nun, she had it again in 1929. All right? In the second time, she said it was baby Jesus that told her. I don't know. But it says, you have seen where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. If what I say to you is done, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. The war is going to end. The war that she's talking about here is World War I. But if people do not cease offending God, a worse one will break out during the pontificate of Pope Pius XI. And what war broke out underneath him? World War II. When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that it is a great sign given to you by God that He is about to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, famine, and persecution of the Church and of the Holy Father. To prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, She will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she shall be converted, and a period of peace shall be granted to the world. If you read this, you would see that this vision is actually the flip to our version of Daniel 11. And that's why we have to understand this. All right? It's the flip to our version of Daniel 11. Because we know at the midnight cry, we're supposed to have the battle of what? Panium. And who's going to be defeated? Russia. Russia is going to be defeated. Was Russia defeated here? Yes. Starting from 1917, Tsarist Russia was crushed. It was no more. In 1922, we have the rise of Vladimir Putin through the Bolshevik Party. Vladimir Lenin. So we do have Russia being crushed. The only reason I have 1922 here, as I said, that was the year he became the outright leader, and he set up the USSR. However, he started his influence from 1917. In 1918, he had the entire family executed. It was Tsar Nicholas II, his son Alexander, and his 3 daughters, and 4 servants. They were all executed. They just found some of their bones probably like 10, 15 years ago and stuff. So the whole family was executed by order of Lenin. Yes?
According to the reading, if you look back at where she was saying that if Russia is not converted, the work that Russia will do in spreading sin right across the world,
Right.
the countries and the wars and different things, it would enact persecution upon countries, and Christianity would feel the iron of
Russia. Exactly.
that is coming in at midnight in Russia for a short period.
For a short period of time, you're going to feel it's basically the rise of the Iron Curtain. Because remember, when we were children growing up, some of us, that Warsaw Pact, we had NATO, and the Russians had the Warsaw Pact, and that line, we know it as the Berlin Wall, but that line was also known as the Iron Curtain. All right. Now, what is the errors of Russia? Communism. And what's, all right, now, up until 1916, Lenin was exiled, all right? But one of the books that Lenin studied was the books of Karl Marx, right? And Karl Marx, what book did he study? Who wrote this book? Darwinism. What does Darwinism teach? Atheism. So we come right back. All of that just to point back to here. This right here is what leads us to right here. All of this, because underneath these 2 Vladimirs, the Orthodox Church ruled. Remember, he was the first Christian king. So that's why he is at the time of the end. Tsar Nicholas was the last one. The Orthodox Church started to go down. It didn't go off the map, but it started to go down. I'm sorry? Yes, because none of the leaders after these, they did not believe in, they weren't Christians. Communism does not have space or time for God. It pushes him out of the equation. Same thing that France did. France was go ahead.
You know, what I saw in what you read on the vision of Fatima is a justification for Daniel 11:14 going between midnight and
Yes.
The papacy coming to the assistance of United States of America to bring down Russia.
Amen. I'm glad.
Justification, it's really demonic. It is justification of the same that will allow them to consecrate through the demise of Russia that power to the heart of Mary. And that's what's going to usher in or set the platform for National Sunday Law within the United States of America and the Universal Sunday Law that is to come later on.
Amen. Amen. I agree. I agree with that. And that's why I believe that understanding Russia, especially in the light of the seven thunders and understanding the vision of Fatima, when you read Daniel 11 and you see them talking about Catherine, you think differently because, you know, Catherine being a woman of Egypt, you put her under the light of the Russian Orthodox Church, and it shows other things, you know. So, but we'll do that later. Let's try and hammer down some stuff here. So we have Lenin rise. Lenin was replaced. Who replaced Lenin? He's one of the greatest despot ever. He replaced Lenin. Joseph Stalin. Okay. And he led us into the Cold War and all sort of happy fun stuff. But we realize between here and here, don't be fooled by the small line. We're talking about a 70 some odd year period, right? Because in 1989, the first time I did this, excuse me, I had 1989 at Sunday Law, and then when I started reading out more and more, I decided not to. But I'm gonna put 89 here because it's very important, right? What happened in 1989? Time of the end, right? We marked the Berlin Wall falling and so on and so forth. Who was the premier of Russia then? Mikhail Gorbachev. So Mikhail Gorbachev was still leading. He ruled up until 1991. So here we have the demise of the USSR. Now, the country here was what? Russia, right? Under here to here, it was what? USSR. And from here forward, what do we have? Russia. The end justifies the... Wait, I did that backwards. The end justifies the beginning. So that's what we have. So when you start to look deeper and deeper in it, you're seeing that God's plan never changed. God's plan is consistent. Go ahead.
What religion the present ruler of Russia embrace, you know?
Yes. They said that he is baptized into the Orthodox Church. It has never been confirmed because he was a former KGB. Now being... Yes, but they say that. They say that, but he will not confirm or deny. Because Russia, to this day, is still a country of atheists. Not communism, atheists.
So the end would have justified that?
Yeah, with the same. Because even though he became Orthodox, it's just like Constantine. He just did it for military gain. If he's doing it, it's just for power. Because what Russia has been doing for the last 15 years, even though they're an atheistic country, they've been building more churches for the Orthodox Church. Now, why do you think that is? If you realize, they have been suppressing other religions, but they're building up more for the Orthodox Church. Why do you think that is? Putin is a very smart man. And what he has realized, which... Yes, and he's like Vladimir. What they have realized is that the more you have people believe in God, or if they don't believe in God, but you have the principles of God being taught in schools, it's easier to have nicer people. Basically, he doesn't want to rule a country full of bullies. And under atheistic Russia, people with no God, they're more aggressive, they're more volatile. And if you've not just, well, yes, but I mean, I've been around Russians. They're nice people, but they speak to you very aggressively. And you, not being used to it, would be offended by that. They're very direct people. You know, they'll see you like move the chair there. No please, no, you know what I mean? And it's not that they're rude, it's just how they are. Now, having them, pretty much. I didn't want to use it in that's, but kinda, okay? And that's why it has been said, it has never been confirmed, but it has been said that he's secretly baptized. Because you cannot be KGB and Christian. You know, at the time, KGB, that was basically like their CIA, their Secret Service, their spy organization. So to me, what I'm seeing is that Vladimir has this agenda more than he has anything else. I remember one teacher was telling us that, I can't remember the name of the book, it's escaping me right now, but in that book it was saying that in order for USSR to beat the United States, they have to lose first. Basically, they had to lose in 1989.
Old lies for new truth.
Yes, old lies for new truth. They basically had to stop being the USSR and be Russia. At this time period, he was with the KGB. So anything that he does, I can't confirm or deny that it is for Russia. It could be for whatever reasons he sees fit, you know. But we are seeing the end justify the beginning. And so, any more questions? Or that's it? All right, thank you. You could pray. Holy Father, we thank you for being with us. We thank you for the light that you have given to us. And Lord, I'm asking you as we continue later on to continue to let your spirit rest upon us, be with our conversations, be with our thought processes, and let everything be geared towards you and your holy work. In your name I pray. Amen.